Hello and welcome to Theatre Beard, the YouTube channel for all things theatre studies. So if you're studying drama, theatre and performance studies or the performing arts, you came to the right place. Today is another Wordy Wednesday and we look at different terminology in the theatre world, and today's is all about words you might hear when people talk about rehearsals. Before we get started though, as ever, if you haven't done so already, please do subscribe to the channel, and if you can give this video a like, that would be fantastic too. So let's get started with some theatrical terminology all about rehearsals, and that's where we're going to start with the word rehearsal. I'm sure you're all very familiar with it and you know it as a practice run of a theatrical performance, but there are lots of different types of rehearsal, and that's why I wanted to put this video together. Also, I've attempted to talk about each rehearsal chronologically, so in the order in which they might occur. Which means that first off we're going to talk about a read-through, and that does exactly what it says on the tin. It is a read-through of the performance that you plan on staging, and really it's the first time that all of the actors and the production team will get together to read through the script before they even start working on it. Usually the actors all sit around a table together with their own copy of the script, and they never get up from those seats. The performance is all done just through their voices. They may not even look at another actor because they'll be focusing on the script so much. Even if it's not a scene that they're in, they're usually following along as it's being read out loud. Also, because there isn't any physical action, the stage directions are usually read at the read-through by the stage manager aloud, so that everybody knows what kind of movement might be happening on stage or whether a character makes an entrance or an exit. If it was a table read for a screenplay, this is usually done by the script supervisor. But obviously we're talking theatre. As well as the stage directions being read by the stage manager, also any physical actions by the actors will also be read by the stage manager, so that all the actors can basically just stay seated. So for example, if a character was to enter a scene and sit down at a kitchen table, the stage manager would read that stage direction that this character has entered and sits at the table, whereas actually in the rehearsal room nobody's moved. It might be quite useful to think about a read-through almost like a radio play, because it's all audio, not visual. Once they've done the read-through, the next rehearsal might be beginning to block the performance, or blocking as we call it. Now, blocking is the term that refers to the precise movement of actors on a stage in order to make the performance happen, because obviously with set and people and props there's an awful lot happening, so they're going to start thinking about where the actors are going to be at any given time. We get the term blocking from the practice way back in the 19th century of when directors would work with tiny blocks to represent their actors, and they would position them on a miniature stage. So they would block out the scene using these little blocks. Nowadays we can block with the actual actors in the room. When a director is blocking a scene, they're doing so to ensure the proper dramatic effect of a particular scene. So they will be giving specific words for actors to move on. They'll also be thinking about the sight lines for the audience to make sure they can see everything, and also thinking about how the actors are going to be working with the particular lighting effects, making sure that they can be lit. Usually each individual scene is blocked as a unit, and once that scene is finished blocking, then they'll move on to the next one. During blocking rehearsals, it's quite usual for the stage manager or an assistant director to make notes and mark in their scripts all of the different blocking that has been made in this rehearsal, so that if anybody forgets, then it's been written down somewhere. Once the whole show has been blocked, it's known as being fully blocked, and that's when the polishing process can begin, and that's really a process of refinement, making sure everything runs smoothly. Now that everybody knows the blocking, you can start to focus on the performances a little bit more. Next up is another term for you, and that term is marking. So there might be a rehearsal where a director has asked you to just mark it instead of performing it, and what that means is to not go full out. So it's a rehearsal where people can save their energy, save their voices if it's a musical theatre piece, and if it's a dance they don't have to dance full out. It might be because the director wants to look at some of the logistics and positions on stage rather than individual performances, so they'll ask the performer just to mark their performance. I've also heard this term used as a criticism where they want people to go full out and they'll just say, "It feels like you're just marking it. Give me some energy." Now that I've mentioned musical theatre, there are a couple of musical theatre terms that I'm going to be using for this rehearsal video. The first one is called a Sitzprobe, and the reason I'm mentioning it is because if you hear somebody say Sitzprobe, you might think, what on earth is that? Whereas actually you've probably heard of the term band call, and the two things are very similar. When rehearsing a musical theatre performance, the orchestra have been rehearsing in a completely different space, having their own rehearsals to learn the orchestrations, and the performers have been having music rehearsals with the musical director. So a Sitzprobe is the first time that those two groups come together and the performers get to sing with the orchestra. Very often a Sitzprobe isn't performed on a stage. There are no costume elements, there's no set, there's no props. It's really just about the singers working with the orchestra for the first time. And often the performers will stand or sit and they'll go through all of the songs and dialogue in order with the orchestra present. We get the term Sitzprobe from German, and there's another German term used for the name of a different rehearsal, and that term is Wandelprobe. And a Wandelprobe is very similar to a Sitzprobe. However, instead of the actors just sitting or standing at a microphone to sing their songs, they will actually start putting elements of blocking in, and they will mark their performances whilst they sing with the orchestra. Next up is a tech rehearsal, or technical rehearsal to give it its full name. And as you will probably guess, this is a rehearsal for all of the technical team to sort out all of the technical elements for the performance. Now, if you've ever done any amateur theatre performances, you might be quite well versed with technical rehearsals. However, in the Amdram world, it tends to be a technical rehearsal with the performers doing a full run through of the whole show. Whereas in the professional world, a technical rehearsal isn't really usually attended by the actors. It's usually just the director and the technical team sorting out all of the technical elements of the performance. So all of the scene changes, all of the lighting, and all of the sound cues. The next kind of rehearsal, where we add in the actors and other elements such as props and costume, is known as a cue to cue rehearsal. This rehearsal is there so that the technical team can integrate all of the technical elements into the performance. However, because it's called cue to cue, they don't run the whole show. They actually just run from one technical cue to another. So rather than playing a whole scene, if nothing technical is changing, then they don't need to do that bit, because it's not a rehearsal for the actors, it's a rehearsal for the technical team. So they will just do one technical cue, so it might be a lighting change or a sound effect, and then they will jump to the next technical cue, which might be a scene change or a lighting change. The actors are an essential part of this process. However, they do need to be able to jump from cue to cue and be able to know where those cues are, so they're going to know their script inside out by this point. Next up, we have a dress rehearsal, and a dress rehearsal is a run of the show in real time as if it were an actual performance, and it uses all of the elements that are going to be in that final production. So they'll be using the costumes, the set, the lighting, the sound effects. If it's a musical, the orchestra will be there and they'll be playing along as well, and they will only stop if it is absolutely essential. This is really the last chance they have to solve any kind of problems. So all of the costumes are being used. If there's a team of dressers, they'll be involved in this dress rehearsal as well. Next up, it's not really a rehearsal, but it is kind of, so that's why I've put it in. And it's a preview performance. Now, preview performances are open to the public, but it's usually the very first time the show has been put in front of an audience. So some things might not necessarily go as smoothly as they perhaps will do a month into the run. Now, the purpose of a preview performance is to allow the director and the technical team to maybe identify any problems that they hadn't considered before now that there's an audience, and also to maybe see some opportunities that they didn't have in the rehearsal process, because audiences can react in very different ways. So maybe a particular joke might not be working and needs tweaking, or they might want to have a bigger response from the audience that they weren't getting, and they can think about how they can tweak and adjust those things before the critics come in on the official opening. Also, a little tip for you: if you fancied seeing the latest production that is about to open in the West End, usually a preview performance can be a little bit cheaper. So if you were looking for something a little bit less expensive, then try and get a ticket for a preview performance instead. But just be aware that it might not necessarily be as smooth as it will be when it's officially opened. And finally, we have opening night. So all of the rehearsal process has finished right the way from the read through to the preview performances. And now that it's had its official opening, the show pretty much stays as it is. There aren't really any major changes, or shouldn't be any major changes along the way. There's sometimes director notes that they have during the run, but generally the show that happens on opening night is the show that goes forwards. And that concludes today's Wordy Wednesday. Thank you so much yet again for joining me. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give this video a thumbs up, and if you wanted to click the little bell so you get notifications whenever there's a new video, that would be fantastic. I'll see you next time.